crew here was going through some other developments on Elizabeth Warren that I wasn't exactly privy to. So I actually just wanted to bring Harrison in to break this down. I remember Mulvaney coming out and laying into this bureaucracy really hard that I'd never really heard of. But apparently there's some background there with Elizabeth Warren setting it up and then using it as a slush fund. Harrison, you were looking this up during the break. Yeah. So what did you discover exactly?
Well, yeah, I'd read some headlines before this, and when Dr. Shiva was on, I printed out and went over. This is a Mother Jones article. Elizabeth Warren calls out Trump's meddling in the agency she created. And so this is according to The Hill. When the Dodd-Frank financial regulation bill was first marked up back in 2010, basically she sort of slipped in this provision that created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, and essentially it had no oversight whatsoever and could sort of do whatever it wanted. It says the power invested in the director of the CFPB was and still is unencumbered by any limiting authority of those elected to govern. So this is somebody acting totally independently. And basically when Mulvaney came in, and I'm sure at Trump's insistence, he is just taking a look at this, and that's causing Elizabeth Warren to have a little bit of heartburn and get a little bit worried because, according to this article from the New York Post, it bounced business owners and industry reps from secret meetings it held with Democratic operatives, radical civil rights activists, trial lawyers, and other, quote, community advisors, according to a report by the House Financial Services Committee. And it also funneled a large portion of the more than $5 billion in penalties collected from defendants to community organizers aligned with Democrats, a slush fund by any other name.
Oh my gosh, wait a second. So they literally created like their own little like fascist tribe.
Right. Well, I imagine, I mean, from what I read from this, they create this bureau that is the Consumer Financial Protection. They find that businesses have done things wrong. They fine them. They or give them fees.
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Yes,
Obviously
right. Very
like net neutrality and the Patriot Act.
Yeah, they're really good at naming things the opposite of what they are. And then they take this money that they've collected through these fees and just funnel it right into these community activists and radical leftists. With as far as
this literally sounds
hearing no oversight.
This literally sounds to me like a fascist Nazi bureaucracy, just some little wing that's just out here operating independently, kind of deciding what businesses are going to basically get fair ratings for consumers. I mean, I'm trying to understand what the role of this actually is, if that's not it.
I'm not too sure about that because I haven't looked into that. Really, the concern now is the fact that it was just a slush fund. I'm not sure what their justification was for collecting the fees, but the fact that they used those fees for partisan purposes, and the whole thing was sort of created on partisan grounds and apparently just has no oversight from anybody elected. So in that way, it's certainly not democratic, certainly not representative, because they can essentially do whatever they want. I mean, not anymore, because now we have Trump in office, but they could before now.
And of course, that's why Elizabeth Warren is freaking out, and that's the story then. Okay, so that makes sense. So Elizabeth Warren gets her dirty little mitts into the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, potentially creates her own little slush fund there. Mulvaney starts to look into it, I would imagine at the command of Trump, and then all of a sudden the fake Indian Pocahontas is freaking out. And then the nerve, though, go back to that story. She says, see, this is the kind of stuff, this is why I have to exercise every day, because my head would explode from anger. She says Mulvaney's actions are a waste of taxpayer dollars. Ladies and gentlemen, we have spent $7 million on the Russian collusion probe for no reason at all, and we have a $17 million hush fund protecting congressmen and women from sexual assault allegations that we don't even get to know about. You want to talk about a waste of money?
This is Roger Stone, and you're at INFOWARS, which is central, because the move to take Donald Trump down in a deep state coup is most definitely afoot. Perhaps the only ones who don't seem to realize it are the president's lawyers. And hopefully they and he will come to their senses soon and understand the grave danger posed by Mr. Mueller and his posse in a cabal of Republican and Democratic party operatives from the elite wings of both parties who have a backup strategy in the 25th Amendment. A great discussion there about the CFFB and Richard Cordray. This unit, which is allegedly designed to protect consumers, was created under the Dodd-Frank legislation, and it has no executive or legislative oversight. It's a rogue agency of left-wing zealots who have penalized the banking industry, the auto industry, the payday loan industry with massive fines and harassment. Most recently, Mr. Cordray stepped down from his position as the director. The deputy director, under some rules written in Dodd-Frank, would allow her to step up to the chairmanship, but the Trump administration holds that superseding law shows that the president will fill that vacancy. The president filled it with Mr. Mulvaney, now wearing two hats as the OMB director and also the head of this Consumer Protection Board. This made Pocahontas, the correct term, Pocahontas, very, very unhappy. So there is the backdrop on that. Owen, there's no question whatsoever that the fix is in. With the news that the Deutsche Bank had been subpoenaed for Donald Trump's financial records of almost 30 years ago, plus a $300 million portfolio regarding real estate development, shows how far afield Mr. Mueller has run.
Well, it's something that I think a lot of people didn't realize when they were reporting, but Trump said that if this probe went into his own personal bank records, he would shut it down. So,
and then there is obviously every day we learn more about General Flynn. As you just saw, I have a piece up at INFOWARS.com now that lays out the inside story. I mean, in essence, the deep state illegally surveilled General Flynn. They listened to his phone conversations, read his email, read his text messages, and then they went and questioned him in an early morning raid, startling him, under which he allegedly lied to an FBI director. This seems like entrapment to me, a complete setup. And then we learned that the agent to whom he allegedly lied is the same agent, Mr. Strzok, I guess it is, who interviewed both Susan Rice and Cheryl Mills, the henchwomen of Hillary Clinton. I mean, the more we learn, the more this entire probe stinks, and the partisan nature of it becomes clearer and clearer. The beleaguered, jut-jawed general, I think, was torpedoed by the White House lawyers. As we have reported exclusively here at INFOWARS, General Flynn did not break with the president broke with him. They ended their joint defense cooperation or their legal cooperation almost 10 days ago, and they threw the beleaguered general over the side. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the final blow by which he took a guilty plea, which he had been resisting. And now the question is, what will he say? General Flynn obviously does not want to go to jail. You have an Obama-appointed judge sitting over this farce, and it is presumed that someone instructed him to reach out to the Russian ambassador. I believe, and as I say in this piece, whoever that someone is the same person who told him to tell no one, which would explain why he lied to the vice president. But why he would lie to the FBI, political atmospherics don't seem right. So it's hard to say, but our thoughts are with General Flynn. I think he and his family are stunned by this betrayal, and I am hopeful that the decision to throw General Flynn to the wolves will not be terminal for the Trump presidency.
Well, it's just so ridiculous, Roger. The very basis, the very foundation for this investigation is based on lies, is based on made-up information, made-up dossiers, fake news. It's like, why don't they just say that Donald Trump colluded with the Martians and then interview everyone that's related to Trump or has spoken to Trump in the last 20 years, find out one or two lies that they say in this ridiculous investigation, and then throw them in jail? I mean, that's basically what they're doing.
Well, let me point out to you that Rice and Mills, the Hillary aides involved in the email scandal, both received immunity for their lies. And
they were both interviewed by Peter Strzok.
Exactly. And James Clapper, the NSA director under Obama, lies under oath to the Congress, says that there is no metadata collection system. Edward Snowden proves to the world that that's a lie. And Clapper pays no penalty for his lie to the American people. Yet another member of the shaved head club. So it is really odd the way these deep state criminals operate with impunity, breaking the law in their efforts to bring down the president. Their Russian collusion thing has produced exactly zero in terms of real collusion. They try to make the most casual and normal contacts with Russians appear like a crime. Oh my God, he communicated with Julian Assange. Well, many journalists have done so. But they
oh my gosh, a bear eats a salmon that hops out of a river. Oh.
Yeah, so Donnie Jr. communicated with Julian Assange, yes, and so he's a journalist. But they have so attempted to hypnotize the American people into believing that Assange is some kind of Russian agent it's almost laughable.
Well, I think we are starting to see the tide turning and the pendulum go the opposite way beyond just our reporting on these things, where you've got Jim Jordan calling for new investigations. You've got Chuck Grassley calling out the entire farce of an investigation. But then I think, honestly, a huge development that isn't getting enough reporting, top DOJ official demoted amid probes of contracts with Trump dossier form. So it turns out this senior Justice Department official who just got demoted, Bruce Orr, was meeting with Christopher Steele and with Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS. So, whoa, all of a sudden another swamp creature is identified in this mess.
Look, I think it's very clear that when the Republican money pit of Paul Singer ran out, GPS Fusion thought they would sell their fabricated product to a whole new client, the Democrats, Hillary, and their backers in the administration. This dossier, a total fraud, is what they lean on as their rationalization for surveillance on top aides to Donald Trump. Last night on Fox, I saw stunning testimony by John Brennan, the Islamic convert who was the head of the CIA. And it is incredible that he says, we turned over all our information on Trump's campaign aides to the FBI. Why did he have any such information? Why were they spying on the Trump campaign? Political espionage, 10 times worse than Watergate. We are here at the War Room. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the War Room. I'm your co-host, Roger Stone, with my colleague, Owen Schroyer, on deck in Texas. And I'm reporting from our new INFOWARS bureau here in New York City, the Big Apple. This expansion is only possible, the War Room is only possible, thanks to the generosity and the good consumer sense of the info warriors and those in the patriot community who understand that we are entirely, completely listener and viewer supported. We don't have any wealthy right-wing billionaires standing in the wings writing huge checks to InfoWars. We work for every penny. And we have become the cutting edge of those who will resist the attempt to replace our president. There's not going to be a silent coup in America as long as we at InfoWars are on deck. but this takes listener and viewer support. So I urge you now to do your Christmas shopping at the INFOWARS.com store. Whether it is the all-natural supplements or the T-shirts or the incredible books such as The Making of the President 2016 by Roger Stone, a book I highly commend if you're interested in how Donald Trump pulled off the greatest single upset in American history. And then there's some of my real favorites like DNA Force at 33% off, the Brain Force Plus, get a case of this, send it to a liberal that you know, they need it. These are great products, and you won't find anything on the site that hasn't been rigorously tested and approved by Alex himself. And in many cases, there are thousands of satisfied testimonials from InfoWarriors and those who support the work we do here. You can see every product has a multi-star rating, 4.9 stars for The Making of the President 2016. So folks, go to the site now and support the fight for truth and freedom and real net neutrality by going to the InfoWars.com site. Now, it is approximately 4:20. And I'm going to bring on two gentlemen who have been extremely active and effective in the fight for legalized cannabis. Tyler Nixon, California attorney, longtime libertarian activist, and no stranger to the InfoWar viewers, reports from a different studio here in the New York Bureau. And also joining us is his guest, Patrick Moore, longtime California hemp and cannabis activist, and a great, great American. Gentlemen, welcome to the War Room.
Honored to be here today,
Roger. So, Tyler, let's start with you. You think that, as I do, that despite the president's view that Jeff Sessions seeks to snuff out legalized cannabis in the 29 states where it's legal. But you've been telling me about something that may be just as dangerous, which is a corporate and establishment takeover of cannabis as we know it. So lay it out for our viewers, please.
Sure, thanks, Roger. Well, you know, I don't think there's any issue that has a more populist base foundation, what have you, a more Democratic base, and frankly, a more Republican base than the reform of cannabis laws and the end of cannabis prohibition in America, which has been coming up on a 100-year travesty against humanity, which is, you know, waging a war against human beings over what is effectively a plant, over what are flowers, and, you know, caging people, busting down doors, just, you know, gutting the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments to the Constitution and other civil liberties, the very notion of self-ownership. 29 states, 30 states just about now have, in one form or another, relaxed prohibition laws, whether it be for medical reasons or for recreational purposes. And the bottom line with that is that we have almost enough to have a constitutional majority, to have a constitutional amendment, if need be, to reform these laws. And across the country, absolutely, the polls have turned around. I mean, you're looking at 90% support for medicinal and upwards of 60%, 65 to 67% support for what's called adult use or, quote, recreational cannabis use. Personally, I don't think you should have to justify to anybody what you put in your body or why you put it there. I think it's a constitutional right. I think it's a human right, to have control of your own health care and lifestyle choices. That being said, just over 50% of the Republican Party now supports, Republican base voters support the relaxation of, or the end to prohibition laws as we know them today. And yet we have an obdurate, an obstinate, a reactionary federal government and federal officials and law enforcement officials who would, keep us in the dark ages, keep humanity from accessing and benefiting from the many, many potential medicinal uses, not to mention just personal uses for the cannabis plant, the cannabis flower. I mean, the research being done now is absolutely amazing. I think it's a disgrace. I think our future generations will look back upon this time and think of us as savages for having denied humanity the benefits of this particularly amazing substance, which is we're hardwired for it. We have what's called an endocannabinoid system in our body, and we actually have receptors built into our brains and part of our entire sort of I guess we call it the limbic system, which is meant to receive the the benefits of this particular plant, whether it be the CBD or the THC. Either way, it's really an amazing, and I don't think we've even scratched the surface. I think we may come to find that we don't need pharmaceutical drugs, that this plant itself may end up being a cure-all, a panacea for humanity. And certainly I believe God put it here for our purposes, because we're built for it. Our human bodies are built for it. And it's a disgrace that we're fighting inertia, in which basically a coalition ranging from prison guards, if you can believe it, to prosecutors, to police chiefs, sheriffs, and so forth, who have a vested interest in keeping these programs of prohibition going, in keeping the control, and keeping the ability to control the citizenry and bust into people's houses and seize property, civil asset forfeiture, has been kept going. There's no other support for it, and it's inexplicable. I would defy anybody to come up with an issue in which you have 90% support, and a majority, almost a super majority of the states have voted to change it, and yet the federal government and the federal legislators refuse to respond, refuse to react, refuse to assent to the will of the people, and the overwhelming will. This isn't a 50-50 issue. We had healthcare shoved down our throats, Obamacare, with barely 50%, and not even. Go ahead.
Let me stop you there. Let me say importantly that Tyler and Patrick both join me on the advisory board of the United States Cannabis Coalition, and we'll be right back with more about the war on drugs. Welcome back. You're at the War Room, and I'm Roger Stone, your host, reporting from our new New York bureau. Joining me, continuing this conversation, is Tyler Nixon, California attorney, longtime Republican and libertarian activist, brilliant writer, and longtime drug reform advocate. And from California, Patrick Moore of the California Hemp Project for Education. Let's go to you, Patrick, but Tyler, I'm going to let you walk through with Patrick what you see going on inside the marijuana industry, which has been legalized in 29 states.
Well, right now, one of the things I'm finding most concerning, being a broader hemp activist, we really look at the multi-trillion-dollar industry in food, fuel, fiber, and medicine. The fact that the medicine's the focus here in California, and that's what most people are talking about, it's important. But we understand that when we replace petroleum with cannabis, that's the game changer, and that's the battle we're fighting for here on the West Coast. And one of the big issues we're having is we're watching a lot of the states that have industrial hemp have their fields raised by fire because of the THC limits. So trying to keep it at below 0.3% THC is irrational, bizarre, is a United Nations standard, and it makes absolutely no sense, and it's going to cripple our industrial hemp market here in America, while we're watching Germany and Canada and China move forward in huge ways, replacing petroleum, replacing nuclear with a simple, sustainable resource, cannabis hemp.
Patrick, one of the fights that we agree on and that is being waged currently, for years we heard tax and regulated, which of course comes from what I would call progressive fascists who effectively want us to purchase our freedom through a massive bureaucracy and regulation and a massive taxation system on what is, again, effectively an agricultural commodity. You fought that fight. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and your work with Jack Herer, who's was a pioneer, frankly, in the hemp and cannabis reform movements?
Absolutely. No, if I had any idea, as George Soros stepped into the scene in 1996 and helped us at the very end of Prop 215, we had been working on the California Cannabis Hemp Initiative before then, and in 96, 95, a lot of coalitions came together and agreed to take a small step, a baby step, and legalize medical marijuana. And right towards the end of that, the DPA stepped in with a bunch of funds, I think once they realized it was going to happen. And the DPA is where George Soros sits on the board of directors and has used that as his central tool, although nowadays there are dozens of offshoots of that, other organizations he runs, to steer cannabis back into the hands of the corporate elite. I believe perhaps the entire process of prohibition has been to get the #1 natural resource on the planet back in the hands of very few. If it was once a very dangerous narcotic, then it makes sense that only very rich, powerful, elite people should be in control of it. If not, you'd have 10, 20, 30 million farmers, hemp farmers worldwide being part of that economy instead of what we see today is the 5, 6, 7,000 oil barons that really control the majority of the world's resources.
It can't be overlooked. There's an interesting study. Opioids. Go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. No, real quick, Jack found in his research for the book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, government study, the agriculture department found that they use 6% of the farm had set aside. We have a reserve farmland. I think it's 400,000 acres in case everything goes bad. We got that. We use 6% of the farmland we have set aside. It's feral right now. Cultivated industrial hemp. We could replace petroleum in America today. There's the book. There's the book that changed the world. Yes. It's and it's a great historical overview. Again, it's one of my it's my favorite historical book. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would urge everybody to pick up a copy of The Emperor Wears No Clothes if you're interested in learning about the history of hemp in our country. Hemp for Victory, which was a World War II program. Our founding fathers used it. It was an essential for rope, for paper. And it's really insane that this mania to control people's minds and tell them what they can or cannot put in their body by way of prohibiting substances under penalty of being caged and prosecuted and have your property stolen by the government, that they would deny it to us and also deny us the ability to use this agricultural crop, which has no psychoactive effects, which is hemp, basically. It's really disgraceful. Pick up The Emperor Wears No Clothes for sure. It's very factual. It's really a lot of clippings from historic magazines. It talks about the Hearst companies and the collusion that happened amongst the barons who gave us opioids instead of having cannabis as for pain relief, which we unfortunately see destroying a lot of lives in America. Roger, you still with us?
Yes, indeed. As you know, we have all joined together in the United States Cannabis Coalition, along with Judge Andrew Napolitano, Bill Maher, Congressman Matt Gaetz, and there are some new members who will be revealed shortly. Our difference between us and many of the other fine organizations fighting for cannabis legalization is we have a short-term mission, which is to hold President Trump to his pre-election day pledge to protect the access to legalized medicinal marijuana by millions of Americans who are benefiting today in the 29 states where it's legal. Recently, as you know, some cannabis activists objected to my speaking at a Los Angeles exposition on marijuana, ignoring a long history of advocacy for legalization that goes all the way back to William F. Buckley, Jr. It's unrealistic, in my view, to think that liberals and Democrats acting alone will legalize cannabis. Indeed, Democrat presidents such as Obama and Clinton are bigger anti-drug warriors than George Bush and Richard Nixon. Put more people in jail for the nonviolent crime of possessing cannabis. So how do you explain, gentlemen, what is going on inside the marijuana movement? Tyler, I'm going to throw to you.
Greed, crony corporatism, control. It's prohibition light. It's been brought to you by progressive fascist type Democrats who would rather control this industry, to have a massive bureaucracy, the old iron triangle. You have an interest group and a corporate interest that has a bureaucracy, and then legislators that continually keep that bureaucracy going, that enforces the cartel. That's exactly what the original anti-prohibition philosopher, so to speak, but also one of the great economists of our time, Milton Friedman, used to say, that the bureaucracy exists, the prohibition exists to preserve the cartel. It just depends on what cartel you're talking about, whether it's totally black market or whether it's a cartel of crony corporatism that is self-serving, that writes rules effectively that make it so that only certain people are able to run businesses or afford to run businesses, barriers to entry and so forth. And that's exactly what Patrick Moore has been fighting in California. And the fight goes on, despite there being billionaires, tech billionaires and all jumped in, and everybody wants to make a big quick buck and sold us down the river effectively, sold our rights down the river. We have to purchase our freedom with these onerous regulations and barriers to entry in which you can only have these massive corporate entities running and controlling legal cannabis. The fight goes on. We will have our freedom someday. We will not have prohibition light. And what is, Patrick, what did Jack Harris say about if it is not legal, if you can't, go ahead.
If you can't grow it,
Patrick, I'm going to hold you up. With 59 seconds to go, we're going to come back and continue this incredible conversation. It's only at INFOWARS that you will get the true story about the fight to protect legalized cannabis in the 29 states. I know personally from my discussions with the President of the United States that he plans to honor that pledge. What then of Jeff Sessions and his constant threats to a legal industry that is providing medicine for millions and employing hundreds of thousands? We'll be right back on The War Room with Tyler Nixon and Patrick Moore, and more on this fascinating topic. Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone, and we are in the middle of a full-throated dialogue about the future of legalized cannabis in the United States. We're joined by Patrick Moore, who is the head of the California Hemp Project for Education, and California attorney Tyler Nixon. We are just going to wrap this up. Let's go to you, Patrick. You were in the middle of a thought about the future of the marijuana industry.
Well, I find great irony that last week the Attorney General was asked clearly if he thought heroin was more dangerous than cannabis, and he said no. And that's something the Attorney General for the last 8 years hadn't been willing to say. Every time that question was put towards him, he skipped around it. And finally, the Sessions said, no, it's not as bad as heroin. So ironically, our current Attorney General is more progressive than the last Attorney General about cannabis, despite all the things he's been saying. Now, I think we have again, a multi-trillion-dollar crop we need to start focusing on. Mercedes-Benz, 1/3 of all Mercedes-Benz produced this year is made out of cannabis. That's the dialogue we need to start having. I appreciate the fact that the medical movement and the dispensaries and all this focus on growing here in California, and yet we're still cutting down our redwoods to make paper. Germany, Canada, China's not doing that so much anymore. And that's the phase of cannabis. Once we got the medical set up and once we had, access to adult use, we want to start focusing on industrial hemp and fair and equal access. That, I believe, will be the largest change in the 21st century, enabling American citizens to produce plastics, food, fuel, fiber in a sustainable way that assures safety for the planet. That's the core of the cannabis movement. Our founding fathers insisted, George Washington insisted with an exclamation point, take the Indian hemp seed and sow it everywhere. That's what we're trying to do. All right,
Patrick Moore. I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Our thanks to Tyler Nixon, California attorney and longtime libertarian and Republican activist, and Patrick Moore of the California Hemp Project for Education. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us at the War Room. Joining me now for a quick discussion of election reform badly needed in America is Christina Tobin of the Free and Equal Elections Foundation. I had the privilege of addressing a symposium that Christina and her people organized recently. So, Christina, welcome to the War Room. So we are having trouble making our connection. We'll be right back with Christina. In the meantime, I want to remind you that I am being sued in the District of Columbia. I am being investigated by the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees and the Senate Judiciary Committee, at least subject to an inquiry regarding non-existent Russian collusion. My personal legal bills have reached almost $500,000. Contrary to what you may read on the net, I am not a wealthy man. I make a comfortable living and I have a great family, but I need your help under this kind of liberal onslaught. Protect Democracy, the group that is suing me, is using this bogus, frivolous harassment lawsuit, which has no merit, for the purposes of fundraising. You can help by going to stonedefensefund.com. That's stonedefensefund.com. And everyone in the Stone family will be most grateful. Continuing now, we are seeking Christina Tobin from the Free and Equal Elections Foundation. This group has been fighting for the inclusion of minor party candidates in the presidential debates. As many of you, I think, know, the Presidential Commission on Debates is not appointed by the president, is not a commission, and most certainly is not about open debate. Essentially run by the Republicans and the Democrats working together, the League of Women Voters long ago canceled their cooperation with the Presidential Commission on Debates because of their rigorous efforts to exclude the Libertarian and the Green Party candidates from the national dialogue. The criteria for why a presidential candidate should be on the ballot today, under their rules, pertains to polling. It's a movable number, but they will say, well, no candidate will be admitted to the debate unless they achieve 15%. And no candidate can achieve 15%, of course, minor party candidate, if they are not included in the debate. It's the proverbial catch-22. The co-chairmen of the Presidential Commission on Debates are former Republican and Democratic National Committee chairmen. They're not interested in competition. The criteria should quite clearly be, are you able to theoretically win 270 electoral votes? In other words, are you on the ballot in enough states to win? She joins us now, Christina Tobin from the Free and Equal Elections Foundation. Because we're a little short on time, we're going to pick it up on the other side to get in a full discussion. But welcome to the War Room, Christina Tobin.
Thank you, Roger, so much for having me.
So tell people about the mission of the Free and Equal movement that you have been spearheading.
Well, our slogan is more voices, more choices. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization whose mission is to broaden electoral choices through education and direct positive action. So we're here to really ignite a spark, a movement, an independent movement to replace these not accountable people in office with accountable politicians, elected officials, starting from the bottom up, because that's where real change happens. And of course, the congressional races in 2018, very important.
I think the work you're doing is very important. I remember a poll just before the 2012 election in which some 74% of the people said they wish there was another choice. Well, there was another choice, the Libertarian Party candidate, Gary Johnson, the Green Party candidate, Dr. Jill Stein, but the mainstream media didn't want anybody to know that. They could not generate the kind of free coverage that the Republican and Democratic candidates get every day. That improved somewhat in 2016, but I think it's only because some in the mainstream media believed that the candidacy of Governor Gary Johnson and Governor Bill Weld, both good friends of mine, both men I admire, would siphon votes from Donald Trump. CNN particularly gave extraordinary coverage to the Libertarian ticket. A step in the right direction, but opening these debates, to me, is the single most important order of business. Now, when I was supporting Gary Johnson in 2012, we looked at the lawsuits filed by Ralph Nader and by Patrick Buchanan. There was no point in filing those suits again. But at the end of the day, this monopoly will be broken when the Free and Equal Foundation successfully persuades one of the big media outlets to sponsor their own debate, and they get inclusion from all the candidates. That, to me, seems to be the secret. Christina, what do you think?
I agree with you on the fact that the Commission on Presidential Debates, which is run by the former chairs of the Democratic and Republican parties, the League of Women Voters retracted their support from the CPD, Commission on Presidential Debates, in 1988, stating it has perpetuated a fraud on the American voters. As Ralph Nader, independent presidential candidate, Ralph Nader's ballot access coordinator in 2008, I would have served for Dr. Ron Paul as well had he ran. It takes over 500,000 signatures just to get on the ballot as an independent for president. And I was with Ralph at a moment staring at all the press at the DNC, and he said, Christina, I could interview with every member of the press here and not reach but only 3 to 5% of what the CPD reaches. So while I do commend those who are filing suits against the CPD to raise awareness, I don't trust the CPD. The CPD is corrupt. Even if it opened it to a third or fourth candidate, look at the sponsors and the people who back the CPD, which again is a product, a very powerful tool the two-party, really one-party system uses to create this illusion, this facade that there are only two, or really one party. There are not. There are many individuals that have ran for president, over 30 in 2012. And I hope,
Christina, I've got to stop you there. We'll pick it up on the other side. You're in the